If a man had already walked away from his family, left the world behind, and retreated into the forest to live a life of deep spiritual practice, then what could possibly bring him back to worldly life? Not fame, not desire, but a cat. Have you ever told yourself, just this once eat won't hurt? And then, before you knew it, that one moment led to a series of unexpected consequences? A small compromise, seemingly harmless, can open the door to a lifetime of entanglements. And maybe the most important part of this story isn't really about a cat at all. It's a powerful metaphor. All it takes is a tiny opening in the mind, and the cat of indulgence quietly walks in, then never leaves. Long ago, there was a revered monk who lived a simple, secluded life in the forest. He had left behind everything, his family, his possessions, all worldly concerns to devote himself fully to the path. And just before he passed away, he left one strange final message to his chosen disciple. Remember, never let a cat enter your life. Everyone was stunned. Not a teaching, not a final verse, but a cat? The young disciple, who had now become the new abbot, carried that mystery with him for days. Until one afternoon, an old monk who had lived alongside the late master for many years approached him and smiled gently. "You don't know the story of the cat, do you? Let me tell you. When the master was a young man, he left behind his wife, his children, and the noise of the world. He built a small bamboo hut near a village and lived with almost nothing, just his robes and a begging bowl. Each day, he'd walk into the village for alms, and the rest of his time was spent in meditation and deep reflection. One day, rats came into his hut and started chewing on his robes and belongings. The villagers, out of care, suggested he take in a cat. He hesitated, but eventually thought, "It's just a cat. Surely this won't affect my practice." And so, the cat entered his life quietly, like a whisper. But to keep the cat, he needed milk. And to get milk, he had to go into the village more often. The villagers then said, "Why not get a cow? That way you don't have to bother anyone." So, a cow came next. But cows need grass, and collecting grass daily took up his time. Another villager suggested, "There's a kind widow in the village. She lives alone and would be happy to help care for the cow and for you." And so, the widow moved in. She cooked, tended the cow, cleaned the hut, watered the garden. Then, over time, something shifted. They began spending more time together. One glance lingered a little too long. One emotion became something deeper. Eventually, they became intimate. A few months later, a child was born. The monk, once fully devoted to spiritual practice, was now a husband, a father, a farmer plowing the field, feeding the animals, providing for his family, like any ordinary man. One afternoon, sitting in the yard watching his child play, something stirred inside him. "I had renounced the world, but now I've returned to everything I once walked away from." And it all started with a cat. The old monk finished the story and looked into the young abbot's eyes with quiet clarity. "Your master wasn't really talking about an animal. He was speaking of the mind, of how just one small indulgence, if we're not mindful, can quietly open the door to a chain of attachments we never intended." And from this story, we begin to peel back its deeper layers. 7 powerful lessons emerge, not just to be remembered, but to be reflected on. Because in our modern lives, that cat could be a bad habit, a lazy excuse, or a moment of carelessness. Harmless at first glance, but just enough to pull us off the path we once set for ourselves. So let's begin that journey together, gently, quietly, like sitting with a cup of tea in the morning, listening not to the noise of the world, but to the soft echoes of our own heart. And now, let's dive deeper into the lessons this simple yet profound story has to offer. 1. The mind, your greatest friend or your quietest enemy. There's something quite strange when you think about it. People spend their whole lives trying to control everything: jobs, money, relationships, schedules. But rarely do they stop and ask, who's actually in control of my mind every day? In Buddhist teachings, the mind isn't your enemy, but it's not always your loyal friend either. Not unless you know how to train it. Think of the mind like a wild horse. If you know how to hold the reins, it can take you across the toughest paths in life. But if you let go of the reins, it can easily throw you off a cliff before you even realize it. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha taught, the mind is the forerunner of all things. When the mind is impure, suffering follows like a cart behind the ox. But when the mind is pure, happiness follows like a shadow that never leaves. That truth still holds today, because the mind, when well trained, can be your greatest companion on the path of awareness. It helps you recognize your emotions, move beyond cravings, stay calm in the storms of life. It opens the door to wisdom, peace, and true inner freedom. But that same mind, when left unchecked, can become a quiet and dangerous enemy. It will dig up old wounds, exaggerate your desires, fan the flames of anger, jealousy, and attachment. Someone once shared this with me. I started meditating to heal after a breakup, but just minutes into closing my eyes, my mind pulled me into a storm: images of my ex, words I never said, memories I thought I'd forgotten. I couldn't control it. I just broke down and cried. That's what happens when the mind hasn't been trained. It's not evil. It's just powerful, very powerful. And if not guided in the right direction, it will take you straight back into confusion, restlessness, even pain you thought you left behind. Many people believe their lives are falling apart because of circumstances or other people. But the truth is, it's the untrained mind that quietly steals their peace. When we're young, we think hard work is enough. But after a few heartbreaks, a few losses, we begin to understand, if we don't learn to turn inward, to listen, to tame, and to care for our mind, then all our efforts outside are just like water poured on a lotus leaf. It slides right off. It's no coincidence that the ancient monks compared the mind to the wind, formless, invisible, but strong enough to move mountains and stir up oceans. Or like a mirror. When covered in dust, it can't reflect anything clearly. But when polished daily with patience and mindfulness, it becomes a light that illuminates every corner of our lives. The mind can be your lantern in the dark, or it can be the fire that burns everything down. It all depends on one thing: whether the one holding the lantern is awake. 2. The trap of small things. There are things in life that, at first glance, seem completely harmless. A random thought, a tiny action, a simple phrase like, "just this once." And yet, it's from those small, quiet beginnings that a whole chain of consequences can unfold silently, gradually, and with surprising force. The human mind is a master of disguise. It rarely shows up as an obvious addiction, a big mistake, or a painful fall. No, it arrives like a friendly companion, sweet, gentle, reasonable. And it usually starts with a whisper you've probably heard before. Just this once. Just once. Checking your phone the moment you wake up. Just once. Telling a small lie to avoid trouble. Just once. Watching something you know you shouldn't. Just once. Giving in to laziness or delay. But that just once repeats itself. Like drops of water falling onto a stone knot, painful at first, but over time, they carve deep. It's like biting into a tasty bait without seeing the hidden hook. At first, It's sweet and satisfying. But by the time you realize you've been caught, it's already too late to turn back. In meditation, teachers often say, the mind is like water just. One drop can fill a glass. One drop of indulgence. One drop of a reasonable excuse. And over time, the glass overflows, washing away your clarity. I remember a middle-aged practitioner once shared during a Dharma talk. I started eating late at night after one sleepless night. Then the next evening I told myself, a little food will help me sleep. And now, my body's constantly tired, my mind feels heavy, and every time I look in the mirror, I don't recognize myself anymore. What leads people astray is not usually one big bad decision. It's small, step-steady ones that keep going in the wrong direction. The Buddha once taught in the middle-length discourses, just as the wheel follows the track of the ox, karma follows the movement of the mind, like a shadow that never leaves. That means every small thought, every seemingly meaningless action leaves a mark. Not to judge ourselves, but to remember. No action is truly insignificant. No indulgence is ever truly harmless. In the story of the monk and the cat, it wasn't a big decision that led him away from his path of practice. It was a small acceptance to keep a cat. From that moment, the chain reaction began. From the cat to the cow, from the widow to the child, from meditation to a worldly life. And in the same way, in our everyday lives, we rarely lose mindfulness because of something huge. We lose it bit by bit through the small things we allow, without checking in with ourselves. That's why living mindfully isn't just about sitting on a cushion each morning. It's about pausing before the small choices and asking, is this really good for my mind? Or is it just another trap dressed up in comfort? Mindfulness isn't some grand project. It's the subtle art of staying awake amidst countless temptations, especially the ones that look like no big deal. 3. When attachment begins with a reasonable excuse. There are times in life when we never meant to go off track. We just took a small step to the side because it seemed reasonable, more convenient, or simply harmless. And before we realize it, that small step has opened the door to a completely different path. In the story of the monk and the cat, he didn't stray from his spiritual path because of desire. It didn't start with temptation or a big emotional pull. It started with something that sounded totally reasonable, keeping a cat to get rid of the rats. Just a cat. Nothing wrong with that, right? Who doesn't want a peaceful night's sleep or clothes free of holes? But to feed the cat, you need milk. To get milk, you need a cow. And to care for the cow, you need someone to help. And that's how the story slowly veered off its original path bit by bit. Many of us have lived through something similar, taking on a new job because it's a great opportunity, staying in a relationship because it's been too long to walk away, continuing down a road just because you've already gone this far. And those things aren't necessarily wrong. But the real question isn't, is this wrong? The real question is this leading me toward the life I truly want to live? The Buddha once said, there are only two paths shown that leads to freedom, and one that leads to suffering. There is no middle road. And that's the subtle truth. Sometimes we think we're standing still, but without noticing, we're quietly drifting further away from our values just because something seems reasonable. The mind is clever. It doesn't tempt us with the obvious. It lures us in with comfort, with kindness, with logic we can easily accept. Just like the monk. He didn't return to worldly life because he was forced to. He did it step by step because the cat needed milk, the cow needed grass, and the widow needed a place to stay. And soon enough, he needed her. Slowly, without meaning to, he walked back down the very path he once left behind. What's reasonable may not be wrong, but it can still pull us away from what matters most: our inner freedom. A retreatant once said, "I started using social media just to stay connected with Buddhist friends. But now, I spend hours a day scrolling through posts, reading things that lead me nowhere. And I honestly don't know when I lost my sense of direction." No one starts a bad habit hoping to become trapped by it. No one opens the door to attachment hoping to be bound. But once that reasonable excuse shows up, and we're not fully present, it opens a dozen other doors. And before we know it, we're living a life we once promised ourselves we'd never return to. So whenever the mind whispers, "just this once," or "what's the harm?" that's the exact moment to pause and turn inward, to ask ourselves honestly, what's really driving this choice? Mindfulness doesn't mean rejecting life. It means clearly seeing what's pulling us and asking if we're still walking with wisdom or just being carried by habit. 4. The cat in the mind, a metaphor for subtle indulgence. In his final moments before leaving this life, the old monk said just one thing: don't let a cat enter your life. Strange, isn't it? Why would a spiritual master, someone who spent his whole life meditating and teaching the path of mindfulness, use his last words to talk about a cat? But the more we reflect on it, the more it makes sense. The cat wasn't really an animal. It was a living metaphor, something deeply human. It symbolized that tiny moment of letting go inside the mind, that subtle permission we give ourselves when we loosen our awareness, even just a little. Because indulgence never starts big. It always starts with something that looks innocent. A small compromise, a temporary distraction, a quiet little thought like, "this isn't a big deal." The mind is great at persuasion. It'll whisper, "just this once. Everyone does it. You deserve a break." And if we're not mindful, we nod along without thinking twice. A middle-aged Buddhist once shared, "I used to be very disciplined with my morning meditation, but one day I told myself, I'm tired. Skipping one day won't hurt. Then the next day, something urgent came up. Then a visitor. Then I got a bit busy. Now it's been 3 months, and I haven't sat in meditation once. And I can feel it, my mind isn't as calm anymore. I feel uneasy." We've all had moments like that. Not because we don't know better, but because the cat of ease and comfort snuck into our minds so gently. It didn't growl. It didn't scratch. It just took a seat, quietly, permanently. Just like the monk in the story. He didn't intend to abandon his spiritual path. But one small decision to accept a katand, one reasonable excuse at a time, he began to drift. And by the time he realized it, he was living a completely different life. In the Samyutta Nikaya, the Buddha taught, "No thief is more dangerous than an unguarded mind. No fire burns hotter than craving. No chain binds tighter than inner attachment." So when the Master said, "Don't let a cat enter your life," he wasn't warning about a literal cat. He was warning us about ourselves. Because once we let in just a bit of distraction, a bit of indulgence, a bit of compromise, it grows. And slowly, it begins to reshape our entire path. The scary part is, you won't even notice it happening. You'll still believe you're in control. You'll still think you're doing fine. But day by day, that cat sits deeper in your mind, quietly influencing the choices you make. Mindfulness doesn't mean rejecting life. It means protecting the mind from those small cats of craving, justification, and comfort. It means not letting the little things become the seeds of something much bigger. It means not letting that first drop fall into a glass that's already full. 5. Desire. A chain that never comes alone. Desire, truthfully, never comes alone. It doesn't just sit still. It doesn't stop at the starting point. It always brings more along with it. little by little, until it forms an entire chain of attachments that quietly bind our lives. The story of the monk began with something very small, a cat. But it didn't end there. The cat needed milk, which meant needing a cow. The cow needed grass. Someone had to tend it. Then came a woman, a child, and soon a whole family. All of it began with just one small choice. But every decision afterward followed like links in a chain one leading to the next, tightly connected. And here's the deeper truth. The monk never intended to return to worldly life. Not once did he plan to walk away from his spiritual path. And no one in that story really seemed to be doing anything wrong. Raising a cat made sense. Having a cow was practical. Accepting help from a kind woman? It seemed like a good human thing to do. But when mindfulness fades 7, the right things can slowly lead us away from the path we once clearly chose. It's the same in everyday life. Just a little craving. Just a small indulgence. Just this once. And before we know it, one thing pulls on another. Then one day, we look around and think, how did I get here? Why does everything feel so tangled? But if we trace the path backward, there's rarely one big wrong step. It's just a series of small ones each, lacking awareness, adding up to a major detour. The Buddha once said, "No fire burns like passion. No net entangles like craving. No river sweeps you away like desire." Because desire, by its nature, isn't loud. It doesn't smash down the door. It simply nudges it open just a crack. And if we don't catch it early, it slips into every corner of our being, body, speech, and mind. One person once shared this with me. At first, I took on a little side project just to earn some extra cash, but the work kept piling on. I started sleeping less, skipping meals, canceling plans with friends, even skipping my daily chanting. Now, I barely recognize myself anymore. I used to live simply, but these days, I feel like I'm spinning inside my own storm. When mindfulness is absent, life has a way of bringing the same lesson back again and again. Different job, different people, different storyline. But deep down, it's the same old pattern. One tiny slip that opens the door to a whole string of attachments. In meditation retreats, practitioners are often reminded of one truth. Every moment has two paths, either mindfulness or the same old loop. No one can step into the same river twice. But if we don't learn from the old current, a new river with the same strong pull will sweep us away again. 6. Real practice isn't about appearances. It's about the choices we make every day. A lot of people think that spiritual practice has to be something big, that you've got to retreat into the forest, sit on a cushion for hours, memorize stacks of ancient scriptures. But the truth is, real practice isn't about how long you sit. It's about how you live, moment to moment. It's about the small choices you make, especially when no one's watching. There are people who meditate every morning. An hour of silence, candlelight flickering, a bell softly ringing. But the moment they step out of that room, they let their mind wander into unconscious habits. And then there are those who don't follow any formal routine, but in a moment of temptation, they choose restraint. In the face of anger, they pause. Take a deep breath. That right there is practice. That's what it truly means to walk a mindful path. The Buddha once taught, the mind is the root of all actions. If the mind isn't trained, even meditation becomes a way to feed the hidden ego. What's tricky is that the biggest traps in life don't always come from the outside. Sometimes they come disguised as very reasonable thoughts inside us. A request to help someone, a reason to delay something, a comment meant well. All of them sound noble. But if we don't take a closer look, we might miss what's underneath. Attachment, ego, a need for approval, or even just fear of being disliked, fear of letting someone down. I remember someone sharing this in a retreat. I used to be the go-to person. Anytime friends or family needed something, I showed up. But then I started feeling exhausted, drained, lost in the background. I realized I wasn't doing it just out of kindness. I was doing it because I was afraid of saying no. I thought I was being generous, but I was actually abandoning myself. Mindfulness doesn't always mean sitting still in meditation. Sometimes, mindfulness is simply pausing at the right moment and asking yourself, is this taking me closer to peace, or am I just repeating an old habit again? It's the ability to say no, not to someone else, but to yourself, to the part of you that wants to avoid discomfort, to the part of you that would rather react than respond wisely. There's a beautiful line from the sutras that says, "A wise one is not someone who knows a lot, but someone who knows when to stop." And that, in the end, is the heart of real practice. The art of stopping. Stopping before a careless word slips out. Stopping before chasing after another craving. Stopping before using the excuse of being helpful to cover up the restlessness or confusion inside your own heart. Because if you don't pause, you'll keep moving. And one day, you'll find yourself far down a road, not even knowing why you're there. And if you're not awake, you'll keep choosing again and again, not realizing that it's not you making the choice. It's the old habits running the show. 7. Inner freedom doesn't come from escaping the world, but from not letting the world take over your mind. There's a common misunderstanding in spiritual life that if you want peace, you have to leave the world behind. You have to go up a mountain, live in a forest, cut yourself off from the noise of daily life. But the truth is deeper than that. Inner freedom doesn't come from cutting ties with the outer world. It comes from not letting that world take over your mind. The monk in our story had once given up everything, family, home, status, to seek the truth. He lived alone in the forest, in simplicity and silence. But in the end, he returned. He got married, had a child, and ended up right back in the life he had once walked away from. Why did that happen? It wasn't because life dragged him back. It was because the wind of desire was still blowing inside him quietly but constantly. He had left the worldly life behind, but he hadn't yet left himself. What he gave up on the outside was still lingering inside. In the Samyutta Nikaya, the Buddha said, even if one lives deep in the forest, if the mind is still entangled, that's not true renunciation. But if one lives in the heart of the city and the mind remains free, that is a true practitioner. It's just like someone who moves to a quiet place hoping to find peace. But if their mind is still noisy with jealousy, regret, craving, or fear, no amount of silence outside will bring calm inside. I remember a lay practitioner once shared, "I used to think if I could just quit my job and move to the countryside, I'd finally be happy. But after a few months, I realized the same old worries were still there. The same patterns of thought still showed up. Nothing had changed, except now I didn't have distractions." That's when I realized it wasn't my surroundings. I needed to change. It was how I lived with myself. The world isn't the problem. Fame, love, money, these things aren't evil. The key is, how does our mind relate to them? If we can live with them without being owned by them, then even in a busy home, even in the marketplace, we're still walking the spiritual path. But if our mind is chasing, craving, clinging, then even if we're sitting in a quiet retreat hut, our heart is no different than a noisy city street. That little cat in the story, it's not just an animal. It's a symbol for the subtle laziness of the mind. And once it finds a place inside us, no matter how far we travel or how much we give up, we're not truly free. True practice isn't about running from life. It's about learning to live within life while protecting that quiet, spacious sky inside your heart. It's about learning to smile at the things we can't control, to gently let go of what no longer serves, and to live honestly with whatever we already have. And maybe, just maybe, that's what the monk meant with his final words. Don't let the cat enter your life. It wasn't about an actual cat. It was a quiet warning, a whisper of wisdom. For anyone walking the path of awareness, don't lose yourself because of one small compromise. Because once you let that little mental cat inside, the next link in the chain will quietly appear. And before you know it, you've wandered far from the path you once chose. In today's world, with so many choices, so many distractions, it's easy for the mind to get pulled away, not by big events, but by tiny, ordinary things. One small, it's fine, just this once. One little moment of letting go. One thought that seems harmless. But from there, inner freedom quietly gets replaced by dependency. Peace gets replaced by restlessness. And the spiritual path, instead of bringing you home, becomes a long road full of quiet detours. But the story reminds us, you don't have to leave the world to find awakening. You just have to make sure the world doesn't take root inside your heart. Stay awake in your choices, in your thoughts, in your actions, because anywhere, in any situation, you can still live like someone truly practicing. So if something in this story touched you, a sense of connection, a flicker of insight, or even just a quiet moment of reflection, that too is a step on the path back to yourself. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. If this video meant something to you, please like, share, and help spread this message further. And don't forget to subscribe to BUDDHISM Seeds, where every video plants a small seed of peace, insight, and awakening. You're also welcome to leave a comment below. We read every word, and we'd love to walk this journey with you.